October was kind of a crazy month, not just because it was the height of spooky season, but we were also finally entering award season, so I ended up watching around 28 movies in October. Most of them were horror, but not all of them. Some were good, some bad, some weird. But here's a recap of what I watched and my ratings for the movie. I admittedly knew very little to nothing about my best friend's exorcism, except I was told it was based off a popular book. It's not the worst way to spend 90-ish minutes, but it also felt like a not as fun Jennifer's Body. Some funny teen humor here and there, but it's a movie I can't imagine I'll ever turn on again, let alone speak about again, except at this exact moment. Look, I liked the original Hocus Pocus. I don't love it, but like most people, I also have nostalgia for it. This movie, though, not so much. I was actually a little surprised by how well received this movie was, but again, I think I'm forgetting about the very powerful tool that is nostalgia. It was cool seeing the Sanderson sisters back in action, but I found the humor to be mostly cringy at times and the movie overall to be pointless. So please, let's just not make more of these, even though the post-credit scene clearly indicates they will. The greatest beer run ever, from the director of Green Book. That alone should be enough to tell you how this movie goes. It's not as insufferable as Green Book, and I admittedly have a soft spot for Zac Efron, but what are we doing here? It kind of feels like Peter Farrelly just discovered that the Vietnam War was a crime and a mistake and said, hey, let's make a movie about it. I've been meaning to watch Haunt for ages, mainly because the poster has a creepy clown mask on it, and that means it has to be scary. So because it is this season of scares, I finally watched it and was pleasantly surprised. Essentially, a group of friends stumble upon this haunted house and, surprise, surprise, the people running it are psychos. First half drags, second half kicks a lot of ass, and while the female lead with an abusive past trope is a little bit exhausting, Haunt is a gruesome and gross ride that ends with a bang. Continuing with the spooky season theme, I revisited The Exorcism of Emily Rose. For the first time since, high school. This movie was all the rage in 2005, but in 2022, it strangely still holds up. Deb from Dexter is terrifying as hell, and I kind of like that it's a horror legal movie. Not many of those exist out there. Also, this is Scott Derrickson's first feature film, a fact I found incredibly interesting. Where do I even begin with this fucking crocodile? Did you guys know that this crocodile is semi-mute? I say semi because the fucking guy can sing, but he can't talk. And I don't mean he sings out his sentences, I mean he legitimately only opens his mouth to sing On Top of the World, The Top of the World Tonight, or another show tune. Is this canon? Is this normal? I admit I don't know the lore of Lyle Crocodile, but I sat there in a semi-full theater flabbergasted. I couldn't believe he didn't speak. Did Shawn Mendes suck that bad at voice acting? I had so many questions and very few answers. The top of the world tonight. Anyways, this is probably my magnum opus review on Letterboxd, but all in all, I don't trust this crocodile or his shitty taste in music. The top of the world tonight. To say I was excited for the Hellraiser reboot is kind of an understatement, mainly because I love the original so much. Top-notch practical effects, and I think it's still pretty scary. Plus, David Bruckner was directing this one, and the Night House kind of rules. Turns out, this was fine. I think its main issue is that the first hour is dreadfully boring, and around the 1 hour mark, things pick up tremendously. We get a lot of Cenobite action, and there's one kill that was particularly very gnarly. Plus, the ending does go full weird and full body horror. It's just a shame it took so long to get there. It feels like Bruckner and company got caught up with all the complicated Hellraiser lore and forgot to flay some people. That being said, still very interested in the universe, and I want to see more of it. I was in New York for New York Comic Con, and this was on TV in the hotel room, back to back to back to back. Not sure exactly why. TV is kind of strange. Anyways, movie's still great. The thriller dance scene might be the most iconic dance scene in rom-com history, but I'm also not sure. I need to check my notes before spouting something like that out, but it feels right to say. Parasite was my choice for the flight back from New York for 2 reasons. Reason number 1, obviously, it's perfect. Reason number 2, and kind of the real reason I chose it, the speakers were kind of fucked, so it was very difficult to hear any movie with the sound turned all the way up. And since the airplane doesn't offer subtitles, I had to find a movie that had built-in subtitles, and so I chose Parasite. Not upset about it. It was nice to watch it for my 4th or 5th time, but if anything, this is just a friendly reminder the subtitles should always be used. I am team subtitles until the day I die. A big hell no from me. And not because it's scary, but because it's one of the most insufferable films I've seen in a very long time. It's not often that I watch a movie and actively hate my time while watching it, but with Dashcam, I did. I turned it on because it is spooky season, but also it was recently added to the 10 scariest movies according to science. And so I thought, hey, I'd give it a shot. And the director directed Host, which I really liked. But Dashcam is the reason people hate found footage film. It follows an incredibly annoying anti-vaxxer as she visits a friend in the UK. She then bothers everyone and steals a car, picks up a stranger who ends up being possessed, and then shit goes down. This movie has very little and potentially no redeemable factors to it. I wouldn't recommend it to anybody, so if you see it, I would just skip it. Did Halloween actually end? Kind of, I guess. Well, at least until they need to make a quick buck, so I'm saying give it another 10 years. Look, this movie has caused a large enough schism on the internet and in the horror community, so there's no need for me to continue to feed into the insanity. I was not a fan of the decisions made in Halloween Ends. I think there are some very interesting and cool ideas, but I think they should have been started in either Halloween 2018 or at the very least Halloween Kills, because they feel extremely rushed in this movie. However, I'm also not in the it should have been a Laurie versus Michael movie for 2 hours camp. If I'm in any camp, it's Halloween 2018 should have been the end of this reboot and franchise, but I guess that's neither here nor there. There is one big positive. No one yelled, "Evil dies tonight."
Evil dies tonight!
Evil dies tonight!
All right, evil dies tonight!
Tar. Is Lydia Tarr a real person? Maybe, if you want her to be. I don't want to go too much into Tar just yet because I'm trying to save a more in-depth, eloquent analysis for a future Oscar video, but Tar is the real deal. Cate Blanchett is talented as hell, and I'm slightly upset at that fact, mainly because it will likely hurt Michelle Yeoh's chance to win Best Actress, but regardless, for a movie that's 2.5 hours long, I was hooked and all in on Tar. Your Next absolutely rules. Never gets old, always a lot of fun, one of my favorite instances of the genre being flipped on its head, and it wastes no time getting there either. Jump straight into the insanity, and it's essentially an hour and a half of Sharni Vincent just kicking a lot of ass. Here's to hoping Adam Wingard comes back and makes some smaller films, but hey, can't blame the man for making bank with the Godzilla vs. Kong franchise. Spoilers, Ju-on the Grudge, which I really hope I'm pronouncing right, is still terrifying. Maybe even more terrifying. J-horror had its heyday back in the early 2000s, and while I'm not sure if we'll ever see that kind of resurgence again, revisiting these movies have always been a really good time. Plus, that final death rattle still haunts my dreams until this very day. Took a quick detox from all the horror films, but also not really a detox because The Last Unicorn still has its scary moments, specifically Mommy Fortuna and that harpy. Regardless, I still try to recommend The Last Unicorn any chance I get, not just for its astounding animation, but the movie was so ahead of its time that it feels like a movie that would have been released in the 2010s. Fun fact, when I was around 8 or 9 years old, I saw both Night of the Living Dead and Return of the Living Dead on Halloween night during a sleepover. At that age, my exposure to horror was fairly minimal. At that point, the scariest thing in my life was the creepy doll thing from Toy Story. About halfway through Return of the Living Dead, I began to cry from fear, and then my mom had to pick me up from the sleepover, and I was scarred for about a couple months after that. Turns out the movie is actually a blast, but I guess my 8-year-old brain couldn't process this was a horror comedy because it is legitimately very funny. I love how Romero doesn't hold back on the comedy, but also doesn't hold back on the gore and the violence. It's just such a perfect marriage of horror and comedy, and a movie I'll happily revisit annually, especially now since I'm an adult. Trying to save my thoughts on Armageddon Time for the Oscar video, but I liked Armageddon Time. I didn't love it. James Gray has been really hit or miss for me, and while there are certain aspects of this movie that I really love, namely Hopkins, it almost feels unfinished. It's clearly a very personal film for Gray as he tries to grapple with his past, but I'm not sure what he's trying to say besides racism is bad. Also, I can't tell if Jeremy Strong's accent is good or bad because it sounds like he's just doing a Ray Romano accent, but that might be a good thing? Not really sure. Did the hierarchy of power actually change? I have no idea. Maybe. I'm not even sure what that means. Look, I'm not a DCEU person, but also important to note that I'm not really a big MCU person either. I don't have a horse in this race. I just hope the movies will be good, but Black Adam is not one of those movies. The Rock says one-liners for 2 hours and never changes his facial expression. There's a kid who rides a skateboard, like, everywhere, and the villain is forgettable and pointless. Black Adam is the movie equivalent to a child playing with their action figures and just slams them together, except with a lot more slow motion. But you know what? Happy for the DC fans. They clearly seem excited about the movie, but I think they're just more excited for the post-credit scene. Sometimes you just need a good cry, and Pig is my go-to cry movie. Cage is still perfect, so restrained in his performance, but not passive. And then that ending obliterates my soul and leaves me in shambles. I've been meaning to get around to this movie because a lot of people I trust had called it Park Chan-wook's most underrated, and after watching it, I think I have to agree. Maybe it's because the title is an acronym for Joint Security Area, but also it's an acronym for the Justice Society of America. Or maybe it's because Park Chan-wook has such a stacked filmography, it just lacks the flash of Old Boy or The Handmaiden or even Thirst. But JSA, like many of Park Chan-wook's films, is nothing short of brilliant. Taking place within the DMZ between North Korea and South Korea, it chronicles the story of two soldiers from the opposite sides and their forbidden friendship. I sincerely can't recommend this movie enough. It left me a little broken at the end, and it threw a very big wrench in my Park Chan-wook rankings. But a good wrench, though. I was lucky enough to score a last-minute invite to the San Diego Film Festival and was invited to watch She Said, the biographical drama that chronicles the women and reporters who took down the scum that is Harvey Weinstein. As someone who loves journalism films, She Said was right up my alley. It handles the topic with so much grace and respect for the people involved, but it never holds back on its criticism of the broken system. Excellent performances all around, and it's one I want to revisit one more time before really deciding on a score. I have a bone to pick with everyone who recommended this movie to me. I mostly avoided it for a long time because of the abysmal reviews, but with the amount of people who acted like this was the greatest found footage film to grace the silver screen, I thought, why not? Let's give it a chance. And you know what? The critics were right. It tries so hard to be like Indiana Jones or National Treasure that it forgets it's a horror movie because at no point is it actually scary. The main argument I've seen from people when they've responded to my dislike of the film is, but it's so cool. It's like Dante's Inferno. They're literally traveling into hell. And my response to this rebuttal is, so? I mean, I'm not really sure how that makes the movie good. I mean, I suppose it makes for an interesting premise, but when you have the camera moving at 1,000,000 miles a second, I have no chance to get scared or really soak in what's happening. And then to top it all off, it ends with the very cliche, admit to your past sins and you'll be free type of endings. Far too many people survive, and it was just overall a bad time. Welcome back, Jennifer Lawrence. Not to say she went anywhere. She was one of the only good things in last year's very abysmal Don't Look Up, but Causeway is a gentle reminder of how insanely talented she is. But what's even better is that she's paired with Brian Tyree Henry, who continues to prove he's one of the most talented working actors in the business. The two of them together result in movie magic, and it's all set to a heartbreakingly good score from Alex Summers. I fell in love with Causeway and really hope others will as well. In a lot of ways, The Good Nurse feels like a Lifetime movie, but fortunately, Netflix paid top dollar for the cast, so it turns out it's slightly better than a Lifetime movie. Jessica Chastain is unsurprisingly very good, and Eddie Redmayne is unsurprisingly creepy, but also very good. And while I'm all for depicting the joke that is the American healthcare system, it shouldn't be doing so at the cost of portraying an actual serial killer as, let me check my notes, misunderstood? In the end, it winds up being a fairly average thriller that true crime fans, I'm sure, will eat right up. Full disclosure, I am a stop-motion loyalist. It's difficult for me to truly not love a stop-motion film. So I went into Wendell and Wild fully expecting to love it, which I did. But the primary criticism for many, including myself, is the movie simply does too much. And by the time we get to the end, it doesn't have enough time to address everything, so it feels far too rushed. But did this spoil the movie for me personally? Not at all. It has so much heart that I found myself still really loving it. Also, it has a kick-ass soundtrack. Is this cheating? It might be. An anthology created by Hollywood's most lovable figure, Cabinet of Curiosities features 8 short films from 8 different horror directors. I won't go in depth in this video on each one of them. Some are fine, Pickman's Model, Lot 36, Dreams in the Witch House. Others are pretty good, The Murmuring, The Outside, and Graveyard Rats. And then there are 2 I'm borderline obsessed with, The Viewing and The Autopsy. Specifically, The Autopsy. It really blew me away. David Pryor's The Empty Man was already a pleasant surprise, and this just cemented my love for his work. I hope Netflix takes notice and we see more from him because he is insanely talented. Also, shout out to Panos because The Viewing fucks very hard. Halloween 2018 was unsurprisingly playing all day on Halloween Day, and as I said before, this is where I think the franchise should have ended. That moment where Judy Greer tricks Michael into thinking she's helpless, and then Jamie Lee Curtis appears from the back and goes, "Happy Halloween, Michael." And they trap him in the basement. Boom. Sign, sealed, delivered, end scene, exit stage left. It's the last time Michael really felt scary and intimidating, even though he admittedly goes more ham in Halloween Kills.
Evil dies tonight!
Evil dies tonight!
All right, evil dies tonight!
Is there a better way to end October than to watch Terrifier 2 on Halloween night, alone, in a mostly empty theater? The movie that has taken the world by storm, but I admit I was hesitant to watch. Not so much because of the reports of people fainting and vomiting, but mainly because I wasn't really a fan of the first one. Also, this movie is 2 hours and 18 minutes, almost a full hour longer than the first one. But after many, many requests that I go see the movie, I went, and you know what? It was fine. Yes, the movie is insanely gory, like some of the most gratuitous things I have ever seen in a movie theater on the silver screen. It's so overwhelming that I completely understand if people did faint or vomit. But as I mentioned in my Letterboxd review and my TikTok review, do we ignore other aspects of the film simply because Terrifier 2 is willing to push the boundaries of violence? Take away the insane gore, and I feel like we're left with very little. David Howard Thornton, who plays Art the Clown, and Lauren Lavera, who plays the final girl, are fantastic. Everyone else, though, not so fantastic. In fact, they're mostly annoying while they utter some of the most inane dialogue. But I suppose what actually matters is that Terrifier 2 is a genre film, and it's meant for enthusiasts of the genre and subgenre. And despite my ambivalence for the film, I'm still elated to see any small budget horror movie succeed this much commercially. It's good for horror, but more importantly, it's good for movies.